welcome back to Music Artists, the Vision and Decisions. I'm Tyler Norris.
I'm Eric Ferris.
And today we're going to be talking about music terminology, theory, and just general knowledge of music. This is another less defined topic. It's not something where you're like, oh, how do I work with a producer? It's more of the general knowledge. And we've talked about this before in our previous podcasts, but we wanted to get more into detail about why this would be important and some of the more common, I guess, themes and general terms you're going to hear.
Yeah, also to prepare you and maybe do a little bit of homework on what could help you through the process. Mm-hmm. It'll make it easier to communicate. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, in general, I think knowledge of this stuff is going to make you just a better musician and a better artist. If you're able to express yourself and explain yourself easier, of course it's going to make you better.
Most of the time, and this isn't all the time, but most of the time when you're coming in and you're working with a professional, they've been schooled their entire career, so they'll use a certain type of terminology to communicate musical ideas. So this episode is really just to prepare you for what you might run into if you don't already know.
I think before you even get into the studio, studying theory or general music knowledge and understanding your instrument, including your vocals would be your instrument if you're a singer, is very important. Understanding chord structures, the way they work, the way chords progress into each other can help you write melodies. Understanding rhythmic breakdowns, such as whole notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, will really help you also with melodies or coming up with even flow. If you're a rapper, understanding, okay, this is a triplet, and so you understand how to write stuff to that. And it's just going to help you as an artist write music. And then it translates into the studio or working with a producer. You guys are going to be it's going to be much easier for you all to communicate with each other.
Yeah, I would say that there's an argument to be made that you don't need to know any of this to create music. However, once you leave your personal creative realm and you have to start communicating with other people, that's when it becomes important. And also, it's the foundation, it's the tools that you would use, just like in any job, you'd have foundation tools,
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to be a theory expert, but you should know the basics, and it just really makes the process when you're collaborating and working with other music professionals to know. And it's not difficult.
Yeah.
It's not difficult. It just takes a little time and some dedicated time to learning these basic features.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even before, like, when I first got into music, I started playing guitar. I didn't really understand a lot of this stuff. I would just play the chords that were on the tabs. But then I would use those chords and create my own songs from that. But then once I started to understand it more in depth, it just helped me get from point A to point B much faster. And you can translate your emotion much faster, I feel like, instead of being stuck like, where do I go after the C chord? You understand you could go to the fifth, or you could go to the minor sixth. So it just makes things a lot easier. Again, like what he said, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be the next Miles Davis, but it is good to know, and it just really will help you in your music career and journey.
Yeah, I think sometimes you mentioned guitar. So the instrument that you grow up on or you learn from has a lot to do with how much theory is baked into it. So
right.
Piano players normally have more of a foundation because you're able to do more. You can accompany yourself essentially with the left hand mm-hmm. and the right hand on melody. Guitar players, you put like notes in front of them, they're probably
like what is happening.
Yeah.
Also piano, I've always found, because we studied when we had to study theory in school and stuff, just piano made more sense to me as theory because it was all linear. It was like just laid out a lot easier.
The fretboard on the guitar sometimes is overwhelming. You don't view it like you do. There's a pattern on the keyboard, and there's also a pattern on the fretboard, but you visually see the relation between the white keys and the black keys, and it's a pattern that just continues up and down the keyboard. So it's a little easier to visualize, I think.
Yeah, so it's like if you're a singer and you're trying to get into this stuff, if you need an instrument to kind of study with, I would recommend starting with the piano to study with.
Definitely. So there are real basic things like we touched on earlier with chord progressions. There's something called the circle of fifths, which kind of explains, or it lays out how chords relate to each other, and scales. You don't have to be able to play the scales. You should know what a scale is,
right,
and how it relates to a musical idea. And even something as simple as the key that a song is in, and then your basic rhythms, your quarter note and eighth note and 16th notes and so on.
Yeah, definitely basic rhythms is something I see in the studio people struggle with a lot, and it's just really difficult to communicate a rhythmic idea to someone if they don't understand like the basic rhythms. So when I'm trying to explain that and they don't understand what like a bar is even, it gets very difficult. So I mean, this might be really novice for some people, but other people getting into it, this is definitely stuff that just makes it so much easier to communicate. You know, when your engineer's like, "Hey, I'm going to start you 2 bars before you get in," and they're like, "What does that mean?"
Yeah, and for some people, this would be very, very basic. And I think the idea that we're trying to convey here is, if you're not familiar with these terms, then it'd be good to familiarize yourself with them.
Absolutely. And then kind of develop an ear for them. So like if you're focused on rhythm, right? When you're listening to a song, kind of break the song down by those rhythmic parts and try to identify them. I think developing an ear as an artist is a good thing, like we've talked about before, in terms of developing an ear for the way a mix sounds, so this is another just aspect of that. And then you can apply that to your own art or when you're in the studio. I think it makes it easier when you can see real practical world examples of this, and especially with songs that you love.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something, training your ear. I actually think that is the most valuable thing to work on. And you do have to work on it because you put notes in front of somebody. I played with many people. You put notes in front of them, they'll play every note exactly the way it is on the paper, which is fine if you're playing someone else's song. But if you're an artist and you're a creator, I think most of it comes down to your ear. Because when you play something, you realize, okay, this is something, I want to build on this. I found something that I want to turn into a song. And you do that by using your ears. So there's a lot of things you can do to help train your ears. I tell a lot of people when they're starting out, they're singers and they're not very experienced with harmonies. I tell them, okay, when you listen to your favorite songs on the radio, don't sing the melody. Sing anything but the melody. There might not even be harmony in the song in this part, but you figure out what the melody is, you know what it is, and then you sing a harmony on top of it. And eventually you start realizing the relationship between the melody and the harmony. And if you can do harmonies, then it'll take your songwriting to a whole nother level.
That's a great point. Going back to even more basics, I think song structure is something that you should know. You don't have to follow it necessarily, but knowing it helps. So knowing how long an intro could be, how long a verse, a chorus, a verse, a bridge, how long those things can be, how songs are structured, how modern songs are structured, the style of music that you listen to, how they structure that. You can kind of break that down in sections. And then you can apply that to your own music, or you can, once you know it, you can break it. It's like once you know the rules, sometimes it's easier to break the rules. Yeah. Again, this is all like emotion stuff. You know, music is art, and so you don't necessarily have to like be dead on with it, but getting to that finished art piece is going to be easier knowing structures and how songs essentially can be formed and developed.
Yeah, I think when you talked about breaking the rules, I think a lot of times things get glossed over in the final version of songs, but a lot of times when songwriters do something, they do it for a very specific reason. Like sometimes it's to relate to a lyric. Mm-hmm. You know, if the lyric is talking about an unfinished feeling or something that, you know, they don't have a grasp on lyrically, sometimes they'll drop a beat in the song, and it sounds odd, but there's a reason they put that there to emphasize the lyric. So if you use, little tricks like that, it can be real creative.
Case in point, I mean, Steely Dan, my old school, California Tumbles into the Sea, and they do the horn.
Yeah, there's a horn fall right there.
That falls down, and it just relates back to the lyric.
Yeah.
So if you guys need a real world example, Steely Dan, my old school, California Falls into the Sea, that lyric, listen to that.
Actually, of all their entire discography, that horn lick is my favorite horn lick in all of Steely Dan's library. And they have lots of good ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you've got a little bit more experience under your belt, you can do creative things with your song arranging. But I think what we're talking about in this episode is knowing what those sections are. You sit down with the producer and you're like, well, okay, here's the intro, and here's verse 1, here's verse 2. And then it goes into a pre-chorus, and then there's a chorus. So if you can verbalize that,
right.
It just really helps the entire process.
But then also you can get more, let's say, like in depth with it, right? So, okay, so for example, if we were to just generalize, a lot of things I'll see is, so there'll be an intro, which could be, who knows, 4 bars, 8 bars, where it's the melody, like the instrumental melody, all the instruments are in. Everything drops out on the verse because it creates dynamics, right? So now that's another term that you should know, right? So you want to create some dynamics and movement in the song so that the listener isn't bored. If everything's just going all at once, all the time, it can get boring. It doesn't have to say it you can't do that. I'm just saying it can get boring. So you have to think about it as from a listener standpoint. So things will drop out in the first verse, and it might be kind of more like less instruments. Things come back in the second chorus. It gets full again. It sounds like the intro. In the second verse, it's similar to the first verse, except maybe you add an instrument that wasn't there or a couple percussion things that weren't there. So this is all like things that you can apply once you understand the structure of a song, and it really takes your song to the next level. And it seems very basic, but the amount of people that don't grasp that I see in the studio, I try to like direct them to do that, but it can really bring your song up like tears, just understanding when to bring instruments in, instruments out, and just build the song. Yeah, the song's always building up to something. Your song is like an arc, and it's got to start somewhere. Usually, the intro gets your attention, and then it breaks down for a little while, and it builds back up. And there's usually some kind of apex of the song. And then at the end, that's where the arc comes down. I mean, it could come down at the very outro, but usually, like, the outro chorus, though, is like everything. Yeah. And then there's ad-libs going. The singer is going off, But that's things you just, like, should study in your own music and apply to your own music, because it will help you a lot. But then also in the studio, it will help you if you're sitting there trying to be creative. You're like, what can we do? Try removing parts or in one section adding something, and then you'll just see something. All of a sudden, something will pop and it'll work. Yeah, a lot of what you were describing in setting up a song and how it evolves. That's a lot in the stage of producing, right? Because essentially the song, if you're a songwriter, the song is the chords and the melody, or in the lyrics. The chords, the lyrics, and the melody. That is the song. How that song evolves and turns into a completed piece of work is another thing. But understanding that, I mean, when someone understands that and they're coming to you for production, it's just so much easier for you for them to be like, oh, that's really cool. You added a guitar in this part. Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of really cool tricks and decorative things that you can add to really make a song special. And a lot of times, a lot of the listeners, they won't pick up on it unless you point it out, but a lot of them will. And especially when you hear a song with headphones that you haven't heard before, and you're hearing things floating around on the left side or the right side, or just things you didn't notice before. It keeps the longevity of a song. It makes it interesting. A couple key terms I'm just going to throw out there that I think that people should know, and this is more classical, but I think it applies, is like legato, which means like when you connect the notes and you flow note to note. Eric, if you want to...
Yeah, that's a good one. I use that a lot with singers. Most of the time, I mean, staccato is another term,
Yes,
but
I was gonna say
you don't really use that a whole lot in producing a singer.
I do.
Do you?
Yeah, especially when it's like if I'm doing rap and someone's trying to understand like
with the rhythmic stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So staccato means more like cut short, like cut, 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 cut. Right?
Yeah.
So it's just easier to like if I'm like do the staccato and the singer's like got you, or the hip hop artist or whoever, it just makes things a lot easier than me being like well, what I mean is like cut it short, don't hold out the notes. I mean, once you like if you know that, it just makes life easier.
True. And there's not a ton of them. I mean there's a ton of actual music terms, but they wouldn't be applicable for most.
Going to more of mixing terms, this can get really confusing, so make sure if you guys are talking to a mixer and you're trying to use, let's say, even production mixing terms, but like the way something sounds, if you're using terms like mud, bright, dark, make sure, it seems obvious, but sometimes it's not. Make sure you fully understand what those terms mean, because I've had it happen a lot of times where someone's like, this sounds muddy. And so I'll carve out the mud, which is like the low mid frequencies that kind of, and that's not what they wanted. They in fact wanted the reverse of that. So if you're saying something like that, make sure, I would say, steady up on that a little bit. But otherwise, I mean, we can still figure it out eventually, but it just helps.
Yeah. I think other terms that I've used, like brighter, that seems obvious. But when you're communicating those things, I mean, I would go out of my way to be as descriptive as possible, just so that you don't end up with the wrong results.
Yeah. If you wanted to be more technical, instead of saying stuff like mud or bright or something, I would even say some more along the lines, say low end, low mids, mid frequencies, high frequencies. So yeah, low end frequencies, low mid frequencies, mid frequencies, high mid frequencies, and high frequencies. And if you understand what all of those mean, and it's not really that hard to grasp that. I mean, you can think about it as bass, mid, and treble, right?
Yeah, I imagine as a mixing engineer, you run into that quite a bit.
Yeah, and this is just general. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to pertain to recording. That's why I'm kind of bringing it up.
So we talked about doing a little bit of homework. I mean, there's a ton of videos on YouTube. We're not necessarily going to point you to one in particular, but I mean, if you typed basic music theory and watched an 8-minute video, you would know the basics. You can cover it in 8 minutes.
Yeah.
We can't cover it in 8 minutes. We can cover it in more than 8 minutes.
Right. I mean, a lot of those people are amazing. In fact, I do that too. If I need to brush up on some of the things that, it just helps. They're really good. Some of them are really good at teaching and making it understandable.
Yeah.
Instead of, going to college and them being like, okay, time to write 4-part harmonies or 4-part,
The college route is something completely different. You go way past. You go deep into the weeds of theory.
It seems like a lot, but it can be not as daunting as you think. Just start small and work your way up and, learn the terminology, understand some basic theory, some basic music, general knowledge, and it's only going to help you, like Eric was saying. And we hope that this episode will help you kind of progress yourself as an artist, as a musician, as a recording artist, whatever you end up doing, just give you a good idea of where to start. But thanks again for listening to us speak to nothing but ourselves. But anyway, we are Maggio, MA6IO. You can find us at ma6io.com. We are a production company in Dallas, Texas. I'm Tyler Norris.
I'm Eric Ferris.
And thanks again for listening to Music Artists, The Vision and Decisions. Go make some music.
You want to hear a joke about staccato?
Yes.
Never mind. It's too short.
Dang it.